Welcome to my table and the castle of the quest. Gather round and I'll share my original 1974 Dungeons & Dragons campaign with you. If you haven't seen any of my other Castle of the Quest videos, that's alright. As a brief introduction to how this works, I report on my solo D&D sessions playing original 1974 D&D rules. In each video, I don't just cover the events in game to give you detailed examples of the original game, but I also discuss how the rules are applied, some scholarship regarding how I believe the rules should be interpreted, as well as various bits and pieces of D&D history. If you're interested in learning how the original game was in its earliest heyday, then this is for you. Check the video out, and if you enjoy what you see and hear and want to go back to the beginning to catch up with the previous installments, then go right ahead. It's been a little while since my last video, and that's because I broke my leg. I broke it quite badly. I broke it really badly actually, and had to have some surgery. So I took some time out to rest up. I'll probably cover exactly what happened in my next Tales of Mystara podcast. But for now, I have a lot to cover regarding the original Dungeons & Dragons game, so I'll blast straight in. It'll be no surprise that I have not played any OD&D for a while now, due to laying with my leg up, so I have a lot of catching up to do. But never fear, because I still have quite a bit to report on from the previous sessions. So here goes. In their last adventure, the party explored the Forest of Evilshore, which surrounds their hometown known as the Last Redoubt. They discovered an old mausoleum within the forest, which was inhabited by zombies. After dispatching the zombies, they discovered a large table within the mausoleum where a delicious feast was spread. Some of the characters were magically compelled to eat some of the food and then climb into empty sarcophagi to give themselves over to starvation and thirst. The questing knights lost 5 of their number during this encounter, and came away with just 40 gold pieces worth of treasure, half of which was in silver coins. The campaign date at the time of this report is the 17th of October 2023. Remember, I am using 1-1 time as I am playing this campaign using rules as written to the best of my ability. I'll talk you through how the next session played out. After returning to the Last Redoubt to reorganise, Ilara instructed that the spare horses, once belonging to their deceased consorts, should be given to any new recruits. They gained 4 recruits to replenish the party back up to 9 characters. The ability scores were not too bad really, apart from a 6 strength for the magic user Ascalante the Quick, but he does have a 17 dexterity to make up for it. But I had to adjust his wisdom from 14 to 10 in order to give him a 13 intelligence, which is of course the prime requisite for magic users. The reason I did not select a cleric for this character's role was due to the 6th strength, but the dwarf, Hilda Stoneheft, was an 18 strength to make up for it. She can open doors on a roll of 1 through 5, which will be very useful. The party had 616 gold pieces, 3 silver pieces, and 35 copper pieces pooled from the gold they already had, plus what the new recruits brought in. 150 gold pieces was spent purchasing basic equipment for these new recruits, 50 to provide Brelandel with plate mail, Her chainmail was given to one of the new recruits to save on expenses, and a further 238 gold pieces was spent on arms and armour for the new recruits. They then had 208 gold pieces, 35 silver pieces and 35 copper pieces left. 200 gold pieces was spent on 40 silver arrows to share between the elves who have short bows, leaving 8 gold pieces, 3 silver pieces and 35 copper pieces, which Alara held onto. I tend to abbreviate my money for ease of reference, so I'd represent this on pencil and paper as 8.3.35, using the decimal to separate each type of precious metal. The questing knights decided to venture back out into the wilderness of Pylea. I had a request from Kui3301 to share my wilderness map. Well, to specifically show it coming together as the characters explore the land. I will be showing it periodically, and I'll give you a glimpse of it right now, but bear in mind it will always be a little ahead of time, as these videos are session recaps. So, on their next wilderness adventure, the party ventured out beyond the last redoubt into the Pylean wilds. They crossed the river northeast of the town and entered the forest of Evilshore. After just a few miles, they sighted a lake on the edge of the forest with a castle at its centre. The occupants of this castle ventured out to meet the party, and we hereby have our first castle encounter. The encounter took place at a 1 hex distance from the castle. In the last Castle of the Quest video, I provided a brief summary of how I randomly roll up my wilderness terrain. I'll provide a bit more detail now so you can get a better picture of how the map of Pylea came together. I explained previously that the basic method is the same as the one in Appendix B of the OD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, but with the table customised so it only includes the terrain types covered in the 3 OD&D books. Appendix B explains that the DM must draw in the seas, oceans, islands, and the larger lakes, as these features cannot easily be generated by a random method. However, I addressed this issue by incorporating a table from the World Builder's Handbook, written by Richard Baker in the mid-90s. The table is for determining what type of land the local campaign area will be, and can be found in the cities and provinces section of that book. The book is hands down an excellent resource for building interesting worlds for an ongoing campaign. It's one of my go-to resources for filling in some of the gaps when using random terrain generation methods from early D&D books. I didn't just bring this table in as is though, but instead I customised it to include some random dice rolls so that the landmass of the local campaign area and its major bodies of water can be drawn onto the hex map with some predetermined dimensions. Another great resource for procedurally generating hex terrain is the Judges Guild publication of Dave Arneson's first fantasy campaign, published in 1980. This book contains some valuable information regarding Dave Arneson's original Blackmoor campaign. Some rules I borrowed to flesh out Gary Gygax's Appendix B are that 4 in 10 woodland hexes will have a lake with an outlet on die 1 to 4, or be spring-fed die 5 or 6. The stream will leave the lake in a random direction where it will continue until it merges with another body of water. Additionally, each hex will have a 15% chance of a river going towards the coast. For convenience, it runs through the middle of the hex. If the direction is uncertain, then a die will determine the side of entry and another die for the exit. If they are both the same, then the river ends in the middle of the hex as a lake on a further roll of 1 to 4, or swamp on 5 to 6. Incorporating these additional elements means that we have covered not just the basic terrain in each hex, but also the major and minor bodies of water. This is pretty much all the level of detail required for the wilderness map of an OD&D campaign. The map of Pylea is an island. I didn't actually roll this, but decided on it myself, as I wanted to have coastal areas, so that the campaign can more easily incorporate waterborne adventures. Once I determined the island's basic size, and plotted the character's home base, and the local dungeon in the central hex, I used some random dice rolls to determine line by line the width of the island in hexes, and that's how I produced the island's shape. There are probably all kinds of methods you can use for this. As long as you're happy with the results and it makes sense to you, then it doesn't really matter that much how you do it. In regards to randomly determining the terrain in each hex as a party travel through the wilderness, rather than rolling up one hex at a time, I roll every hex that surrounds the current hex. Then a direction is chosen, the party move, and the surrounding hexes are determined at random again. This has been working well for me so far, and it means that when a castle is rolled up, the appropriate check to see if the inhabitants of the castle will come forth can be made from one hex away. I discussed inhabitations in my previous video, and I'll expand a little. Each hex has a 17% chance of being inhabited. These inhabitations can include anything from a single dwelling of just a handful of people, up to a sprawling city of 60,000 people. As well as inhabitations, there is also a chance for ruins, and of course, castles. OD&D Book 3 explains how castles work. It says, the inhabitations of these strongholds are determined at random. Occupants of these castles will venture out if a party of adventurers passes nearby. If passing over the castle hex, there is a 50% chance, die 1 to 3, that they will come out. If 1 hex away, there is a 33 1/3 chance, die 1 to 2. And if 2 hexes away, there is only a 6 2/3 chance, die 1. Note the castle occupants can come out if 2 hexes away, and I'm only populating the hexes surrounding the party's immediate location. This is okay because as the map is drawn up, the unpopulated hexes will quickly get filled up, and so it is highly likely that the party will find themselves within 2 hexes of a castle at some stage. OD&D also tells us if the party is on the castle hex and hails the castle, the occupants will always come forth if the party is not obviously very strong and warlike. Patriarchs are always lawful, and the evil high priests are always chaotic. All other castle inhabitants will be either hostile to the adventurers, die 1 to 3, or neutral, die 4 to 6. The way castles work in OD&D are pretty cool. They offer some interesting mechanics which are actually perfect for solo gamers. The occupants, along with their guards and retainers, are rolled up randomly using a table, and depending on who the occupant is, certain events can unfold. Fighters request a joust, which requires chainmail jousting rules. Magic users send characters on treasure hunts by Gaius, and clerics will demand a tithe. There are some variations depending on how hostile the castle occupants are. The Castle of the Quest itself is built up using the individual features and prices sketched for constructing strongholds. There is every chance that at some stage in this campaign, any castle may come under siege. So I wanted a basic method of determining roughly how the castle was made up. The Judges Guild's first fantasy campaign was once again very useful for this, as it provides the main types of castle that Dave Arneson liked to use in his Blackmore game. So I brought this into my own campaign and made a random roll to decide which type of castle I was dealing with. The castle on the lake is a Type 2 castle. If a siege does occur, I can construct this castle using the castle type and the parts and prices listed as a guide. A Type 2 castle has a gate, square tower, 4 walls, a gatehouse, round tower, and a 20-yard ditch. The occupant is a patriarch, or 8th level cleric, along with 19 heroes, 3 assistant vicars, and 110 guards who defend the castle. This includes 55 lightfoot crossbow figures and 55 heavyfoot figures. The Patriarch demanded a tithe of 10% of all the party's money and jewels. 10% equates to 8 silver and 21 copper pieces, and the party, being considerably outclassed by the castle's entourage, did not hesitate to pay this tithe. Following the castle encounter, the party travelled west, deeper into the forest, and after a mile they turned southeast, coming out onto greensward on the edge of a river, which wound a mile west past a decent-sized village. As a solo gamer, I'd bumped into an excellent opportunity to get creative. The D&D game, across its various editions, has periodically alluded to the idea of urban adventures across sprawling settlements, but without any hard and fast procedures to help bring these types of adventures to life. This isn't a huge problem in a group game, but in a solo game we do require something a bit more robust to conduct an urban adventure. We have a means to generate random wilderness terrain, random dungeon levels, but settlements are a different matter. However, I figured, why not approach it in a similar fashion? So, as an interesting experiment, I took Gary's random dungeon tables from his Solo Dungeon Adventures article, and using this as a foundation, I started to sketch out a random generator for mapping out settlements. This is by no means a finalised procedure. It needs a lot of work. I'll be doing some reading on the side to learn more about how medieval towns and cities operated, to give the whole thing some structure. But I'll explain what I have come up with so far. The periodic checks of the dungeon generator have been changed so they generate streets and side streets instead of passages, buildings instead of chambers and rooms. And when a random encounter occurs, I look to the City Town Encounters section of Appendix C in the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide. I also have random gates, which can act as guardhouses, which can occur on the outer and inner parts of the city. The guards here can demand tolls, taxes to be paid on bringing goods to market, or they might check for documents of sale for various items brought in. This whole system is still very much trial and error, so my first few settlements may be pretty peculiar places. I'll provide more detail as time goes by. For NPC interactions, I used the persona of non-player characters in the AD&D DMG as a basis for what information can be extracted from an NPC. I have reorganised these individual traits into the following categories: personal, material, intellectual and emotional, and interests and hobbies. So NPC interactions are pretty simple. I decide what the party want to learn about the NPC, and I roll on an appropriate table relating to an appropriate trait. For example, maybe I want to try and recruit the NPC into service, so I would choose to learn about the NPC's bravery trait. If they are not very brave, this could result in a -3 penalty to their reaction roll. I've devised an NPC record sheet, which I can complete as information comes to light through these interactions. Some of the traits directly link to bonuses and penalties to reaction rolls. This ensures their personality affects their reaction to my characters. It's not just random encounters that bring about NPCs. Interactions with the more specialist types can be brought about through discovering the various places of business within the settlement. The World Builder's Handbook, as mentioned earlier, is a fine resource for randomly determining which businesses are in a particular town. The procedure is based on the population of the settlement. In essence, if there is enough people to support a particular kind of business, then it has a higher chance of being present. If the demand is more than sufficient, then several of the same type of business can exist. Before exploring a settlement for the first time, I determine which businesses are available, and then as the party explore the settlement, if a building is indicated, I randomly roll up a business. Using this method means as the party explore the settlement, they discover places of business and meet the various proprietors or specialists, which gives them access to resources which can strengthen their roles in the campaign world. They might come across a powerful wizard who they can pay for spell services, or a shipwright who can build them a small galley to take them to distant lands. They could buy a few rounds of drinks in the local tavern to pick up some new retainers. The options are not exhaustive, and I am myself just scratching the surface. Having these options means I can escape the monotony of the dungeon when it begins to feel repetitive, but avoid the dangers of the wider wilderness where survival is far less guaranteed. Let's take a look at what the first urban adventure entailed for the questing knights. It's worth mentioning before I dive into the events that transpired that my approach to urban adventuring is still very much a work in progress. I'll be ironing out the creases as I progress. Using my random generator, the party came to a gatehouse on the edge of the village. They were required to pay a toll of 90 copper to enter. The use of taxes and tolls are recommended by Gary Gygax in the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide. When it comes to early resources for urban adventures, this book should definitely be counted as one of them, as it contains a lot of great details. Other places to look for suitable guidance might be the village of Homlet, as this adventure module, written by Gary Gygax, is a great example of how a medieval town might be presented to a group of players. As they were making their way past a merchant's house, the party saw a group of nondescript persons loitering ahead. This was my first random encounter with a group of labourers. There were 10 of them. Upon conversing for accurately extracting information to flesh them out as NPCs, the party established that these individuals were quite devout in their religious faith, to the point where they even seemed to abstain from having any self-indulgent interests. They all looked youthful and considered themselves of average piety. So, interpreting this, perhaps this means that their devout faith is essentially the norm for the village. They have very little compassion or tolerance for other religious views, especially those that appear iconoclastic in nature. After this encounter, the party headed further into the village, where they found an inn. They turned right from the inn, where they stumbled across a group of giant rats feasting on horses in the stables. This encounter ended up being pretty straightforward. The party won the initiative roll. They rode in with lit torches and successfully scared the rats away with fire. This seems a very logical thing to do in this situation. In fact, in Underground and Wilderness Adventures, it says, burning oil will deter many monsters from continuing pursuit. This is a fine example of the kind of ambiguity a referee must deal with when implementing OD&D. To have some consistency, I needed to figure out which monsters should be scared of fire. What are the chances of success when using fire to deter them? I decided to treat the mechanic much like clerics versus undead monsters, a 2d6 roll against a target number, and I gave the giant rat a score of 7 versus fire. This is a table I will develop on the fly most likely using good old-fashioned logic. After the rats had been chased away, the innkeeper had nothing to offer the party, not even a free meal, as his business is currently in tatters due to the troublesome rats constantly eating his patrons' horses, and 1 or 2 patrons who were a bit too drunk to put up much of a defence. No oracles were used to figure out any of this, just uncovering details about the NPCs and using that good old-fashioned logic again to make sense of things in the context of what is currently happening. This is enough to create all kinds of optional paths of exploration and adventure. And in this old-school approach, I think that the urban setting is where this kind of play really shines. What happened next is another great example of the kind of narrative that can come from simple NPC interactions, combined with randomly generating the layout of a settlement and its important structures. From the inn, the party moved along, riding towards a carter's shop, meeting a peddler along the way. The peddler explains he had all his sellable goods stolen and is now destitute. The peddler blames a group of tradesmen who mugged him and stole his wares. Further conversation with the peddler uncovers the man is scrupulously honest and lawful. The peddler also explained that he believed his goods were sold to a fence operating from behind the carter's shop. The party made an offer to recover the goods for a 25% share of their value. The peddler, however, is a greedy-natured person, so a -2 penalty will apply to this type of reaction roll. "Would you have the clothes off my back as well?" the disgruntled peddler responded, so the party reduced their offer to 10%. This time, Brie Landell negotiated. With the added bonus of her high charisma score, the penalty on the next reaction roll was reduced to -1. I rolled a 2. "Out of my way," said the peddler as he forced his way past. The party approached the fence to make enquiries, but the fence explained he had no possessions and was more than happy to show the party an empty ramshackle warehouse. If he ever secretly had the peddler's goods, they were certainly gone by now, so it seemed. The party noticed the high wall of the carter's yard, which had a locked door in sight of the shop. But as the party made their way around the boundary wall to further inspect, 2 drunken rakes, who were also 8th level fighters, approached them. They immediately began to intimidate the party with sarcasm and rudeness. The rakes won the initiative, but their reaction roll dictated they were uncertain, so they simply stood their ground and continued to hurl abuse at the party, to see if they could get a rise out of them first. The party, however, were not willing to start a fight with these 8th level fighters, so they tried to entice them into submission with valuable information, explaining that they have maps which can lead them straight to the 2nd level of the maze below the castle of the quest. They offered the rakes a share of any treasure acquired if they agreed to join the party on the next expedition. Once again, Brie Landell negotiates. The stubborn rakes are uncertain, so a further offer is made, and the rakes finally agree to a double share of the treasure. This is where the adventure ended. the party returned with their new recruits to the last redoubt to make plans. Tune in to future videos to find out what happens next in this campaign. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll see you next session.